Welcome to Writing the Wrong Way. This is a podcast for serious writers who want to develop their skills in artistry and stand out in a crowded industry by taking intelligent, creative risks. I'm your host, Jonathan Ball. I hold a PhD in literature. I'm the author of numerous books, and I take a very analytical approach to art making, emphasizing both efficiency and experimentation. So I'm talking to Gregoire Courtois, who is the author of a number of books in French, and then his first book translated into English, translated by Rhonda Mullins and published in Canada and the US by Coach House Books, is The Laws of the Skies. And I was very excited about this book when it came out because my really specific interest, I'm interested in a lot of different types of literature. But if you have listened to this podcast for a while, you'll know that I'm extremely interested in horror, and specifically horror fiction that has unusual narrative voices and a kind of unusual narrative structure, what I might call a kind of an experimental horror in some sense. And what I find really fascinating about this book is, on one level, its content is very wild and extreme, even for the horror genre. But then on another level, it has a very unusual style of writing for a horror story. So Gregoire, I just wanted to just kind of start with, maybe you can tell people a little bit about just what the novel is. What is it about on a basic level, and then we'll kind of maybe move from that point.
Actually, it's a really simple story because it's a class of kids going on a trip on the forest with 3 grown-ups, and they all die. That's the point.
Yeah, that's the first page, and I love the first page of this book. Made me fascinated and really got me. I found it so interesting because on the first page of this book, that basic setup, you establish, these kids, they're all around 6 years old. They're, basically in grade 1. They're going to this, trip into the forest. And the last line of the first paragraph is, they would never return. And it's such an amazing opening to me for a couple of reasons. But one is that you just immediately establish that there's no hope in this novel in a certain level, which I think is a weird and interesting way to start things off. And it's difficult as a writer, I think, to try to establish. I mean, often in horror, what you're playing with is, will this person survive this situation? So you decide to just eliminate that immediately in a certain level. So can you talk a bit about where this kind of idea came from and why you sort of chose to open that way?
I don't remember specifically when it came, but I think it was really early, of course, because it's the first page and I wrote it first. It was not later, So I think it was a challenge, because you are right. It's very difficult for a writer to compose a text with no suspense at all. The reader knows everything from the start. So the writer has the duty to interest the reader, even if he knows the end. That was the challenge. And the challenge evacuate that's what you said, the who will survive, those kind of things. I didn't want to write a story, a regular story, a story with common narratives, common narrative arcs. I wanted to write something radical, extreme. You pronounce the word. I wanted something extreme and with no hope from the start. So the point is elsewhere.
And what I think is really interesting about that is, at the same time, you've I think very smartly, picked a really specific horror genre. Like the way I describe this book to people is, it's basically a slasher film, but with 6-year-olds. So it's on one hand this story structure, the slasher film, more or less, where we're kind of like one after the other. There's a victim, not always being killed by this. Like sometimes they're succumbing to the environment, often, and then sometimes to this killer. But on one, it's a very elemental genre, and that has a very kind of clean structure in many ways. And you kind of also compare at different points in the book this to a fairy tale. Children should not go into the woods. It is a sort of core, one of the core lessons of a fairy tale that you keep kind of reminding us of, the narrator keeps reminding us of. But at the same time, it is a very complicated and unusual story. I think it's an interesting balancing act where you have this very conventional or very straightforward, I guess you'd say, plot structure that we get in fairy tales or slasher films. But then you have a very kind of complicated way of moving through that. And it isn't conventional, but you've got this very, on the surface, conventional story structure that you're using. I'm just wondering, like, how did you get to settling on that kind of slasher-like plot structure?
Yeah, that's it. You absolutely get the point because I first wrote the plan. What will happen in this novel? It was a really simple plan. Which characters will die and when. I knew that when I start to write, but when you write something, things happen, and things happen in my mind. It's difficult to stay straight to what you planned. It's difficult to stay simple, even with a simple plan. And this is a slasher plan. You are right. This is a slasher movie plan. This novel is very simple. It's mathematical. It's a grain of sand, one after the others, and that's why I as a writer, I'm happy to play in this simple frame. And I don't remember. Wait.
It reminded me of a sonnet in a way.
Yeah.
Like you have this structure in place. Like it almost seems like you're using the slasher film story as a structure.
Yeah, the structure is very simple, and it's written in the beginning. My inspiration for this were more movies like Pasolini or Antonioni. Those directors wrote films mathematically, like plans, like symmetry, and I think about Theorem. If you have seen this movie, Theorem, or other movies by Antonioni. I was more inspired by those movies than the slasher movies, because slasher, I like slashers, but I haven't found some they are interesting enough. I think Pasolini or Antonioni are more popular directors than Final Destination or things like that, because the structure is shocking for the people. It's more shocking, more popular, more bone breaking. I don't know the word, and I tried to do that.
Well, one of the problem with slash films, of course, is they become very formulaic. What I think is interesting is, again, I always would compare it. It's different, but it's almost sonnet-like in the structure of, here's a very rigid structure that like the plot of a slasher-like story, is a rigid sort of structure, but inside of that, of course, a bad story will just follow the structure, whereas a good, story will just inside of that structure find inventiveness, or even start subverting it and playing with it. And what I think you do interesting is making this move towards like a fairy tale. But then you start subverting that. I mean, there's a moment in the book where you talk a character. Well, as the narrator, I guess you have this sort of narrative voice that kind of operates like a character. This person who's telling us a story, who's not a character in the story, but is just sort of telling us what has been happening, and at one point compares the different. The voice starts to talk about the difference between what is happening here and what might happen in a fairy tale. And the line is it says something in English along the lines of, there is always a lesson in stories, because if you tell a story without a lesson, then it destroys civilization a little. But then this story has no lesson. What can we learn from this story? And I think, can you talk a bit about that kind of tension and how you keep bringing up, at different points you bring up this idea of storytelling itself. Characters start telling stories, but then they never really get to the end of the story because they are murdered, or they just start losing their ability to tell the story. They don't believe in these stories anymore, and so it sort of starts to fall apart. And I'm curious to know your thoughts on this story in terms of that sort of theme of trying to tell a story and sort of failing to tell the story people will accept as a story, and so on. I don't know if that's a very clear question, but...
No, it is. But first of all, I wanted to tell stories. Tales. That's what I wanted to do in this novel, because it talks about kids in the woods, around the fire. It has to be a book of stories, but not one story, many stories. And I tried to create more stories possible. And you said it. There are some of them are metaphorical, some of them are horrific, some of them are unachieved, and that's why I wanted to do absolutely. I wanted just to talk about the narrator, because you talk about the narrator, and I think it's very important in this novel. The narrator is, in France sometimes readers say to me that the narrator is cynical, but I don't think he is. Actually, this narrator is neutral, and being neutral while kids die is a problem. You cannot be neutral. You have to be affected, moved. You have to feel something when a kid dies. And this narrator absolutely doesn't. He doesn't feel anything. He is neutral. So that's a really important character of this novel. And I tried to stay straight to this neutrality, but it was hard, because you are tempted as a writer sometimes to be cynical, to make jokes. I don't know, because in horror, when you look a horror movie with your friends, sometimes you laugh because it's funny, even if it's horrific, it's funny. I tried, and sometimes I failed. I tried not to be funny with this, to be really primal. I had to be primal with this, and sometimes it works. But some readers, some readers laugh when they read The Laws of the Skies, and for me, it's a failure. Absolutely.
I think I understand that completely, though, because what is so interesting to me about the book, and I think the best horror stories or horror films do this same thing, which is that they take the audience and pull them close to a disturbing perspective on the events. And I think, I think a horror story that sort of fails in a way is, to me anyway, is where you're too distanced from the event. Either you're sympathizing with the characters, or you're too distanced from the characters and are laughing at them. But I think what's interesting is the weird middle position where you aren't quite with the characters, but you're not quite able to separate yourself. But you're with this weird storytelling point of view, and you're kind of viewing yourself as an audience member and being disturbed by the position. Like, what I think is so interesting about this kind of narrative voice, and the way that you kind of have this, I think it puts the audience in this position where they have to understand that they are watching kids die, and it's something that Hitchcock does a lot in his films, and you see in certain other really excellent horror, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Well, sometimes it'll do this at one point, where it starts to bring you into the position of making you aware that your job as the audience member here is to enjoy these horrible things. They're happening for your benefit or to show you something. And it makes you culpable, or makes you involved in the killing in a weird sort of disturbing way. And I think, like, just being close to this narrator is sort of the frightening thing in the book. Like, what I think is interesting about this story in some ways is I don't find that the children dying is that frightening compared to being close to this person who is neutrally telling us about the children dying is disturbing, if that makes sense. Like, that closeness to the voice is, I think, the disturbing aspect in many ways.
Yes, absolutely, and I hope it works this way, because this narrator has to be the most disturbing thing in the novel. You said that there is a link between the writer and the reader, or between the narrator and the reader, and it's true, because I wanted this link. Sometimes in the novel, the narrator speaks to the reader. He tells the reader has a duty while reading. If you read this is because you wanted to read a book with children dying, and that's your responsibility. There is a responsibility because I'm the writer and I wrote this, but the reader has also a responsibility, because you read it and sometimes you bought it. You bought it in a bookstore. You made this choice, and we can go back to the first page. The first page is the menu. It is what you will find in this book. I'm not tricking anyone. So that's the responsibility of the reader to read this book, and that's why the narrator is sometimes annoying, or sometimes I don't know. Is because he put the reader between he put the reader in front of his responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, and why it's so interesting to me, because, again, why the first page is so impressive to me was it just lays out, it almost feels like a challenge, like, here's what will happen, are you going to read this book? And you now have a choice to make. And you kind of stop short of saying that, but I think it very much is an implication, are you going to read this book? Like, is this really the book that you are interested in reading? And then at certain points, you are sort of reminding the reader in a way, like, that they have chosen this. They have chosen to be here and to be a sort of witness. And what does that mean about, like, why are they here? Starts to become a disturbing question, I think. And at certain points, you play with the idea that maybe they have some hope that the kids will get out of the situation, but they shouldn't. Remember, we already know what will happen. Like, so either they're here because they want to see these things happen, or they're here because they've been trained to hope, and we need to break them of this training. It's a very, I wouldn't say that's a cynical point of view, though I think you're right. Like, it could easily be read or I think misread as like being cynical. I think it's almost just a sort of, it's a kind of neutral, maybe even a little melancholy, but more almost an accusatory like point of view. Like, why are you here reading these things? Is there what does it mean? I think it's interesting because it reminds me of something that Stephen King once said. That was his goal, but I don't think he ever really achieved this goal. But King used to say that his goal was that he wanted to hurt the reader, and I think ironically he rarely, other than maybe with Pet Sematary or something, he rarely where again you got a child being killed, and that's sort of where a lot of the horror revolves around. But I think that sort of goal is an interesting goal for the horror story, like to hurt the reader and to threaten them and the things that they believe or even believe about themselves is I think that's the most interesting kind of horror to me, and I really see this book falling into that very small group of stories that has as their goal, or maybe even achieves, a sort of hurting of the reader, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're talking about Stephen King. I like him very much. Anyway, in this particular subject, I think Pasolini and his movie Salo is absolutely the reference for me, because Salo, when Pasolini shoot this movie, he said, "I want." We are in the 70s in Italia, and it's very a tough moment of history in Italia. There are bombs, anarchists, and it's very hard, dead for nothing, and it's very difficult. And Pasolini said, "You want blood, you want sex, you want mass media, you want those kind of things. I will show you what it is really." And Salo was made for this, to be the most extreme movie of its time. I think it succeeded. Salo is barely watchable. It's a really extreme movie. I remember seeing it in a cinema in Paris, and I don't know. Half of the room, half of the spectators went off during the movie. Well, Salo was more a reference for me, and about hope, because you talk about hope.
Yeah, this
the difficult. Well,
I was just going to say, like, when I bring up King, I don't mean, like, this is nothing. This is the actual opposite of what he does. It's just that he has that interesting quote where he has, like, this... He claimed he had this goal, which I always thought was an interesting goal, but something... It has nothing to do with his work, weirdly. But that goal, I think, is something that you see... I mean, Buñuel had that goal with Un Chien Andalou and was disappointed that people liked the film. That goal of, hurting the viewers in a certain sense, and like trying to draw their attention to their own decadence. And I even just think of again this is I'm very curious to know what the reaction has been to the novel that you've seen so far. It's just coming out now in English. But it's been out in French for a little while now. How has the reaction to the book been?
It's special because in France, the book was published in a collection of thriller and mystery. Really. I don't know, with a policeman. I don't know the how you call it in the US. So it's really strange because people who read my book was waiting for something like mystery with a policeman looking for the murderer and something like that, and they were very disappointing, of course, because that's like the Lieutenant Colombo, and where you know
stories, yeah.
yeah. But in Colombo, you know exactly who did it at the beginning, and it was exactly that. You know exactly what happened at the beginning, but there is nothing more in the rest of the book. Nothing more in a sense of a detective story. So the Laws of the Skies really upset readers in France. Upset or shocked, of course, because I had some of them was scandalized by the book, and I received letters, and I received my own book. They sent me back because everybody knows where I'm working, because I own a bookstore. So sometimes I receive my own book because people don't like it.
So they return it directly to you.
yeah, absolutely. Or they phone at the bookstore to insult me. That's it can happen. So the reaction in France is very strange, because I'm very proud to be published in English at Courtois Books, because I know this is a more literary house. That's why I'm really happy, because readers knows exactly what they are reading, and in France it was not this. It was more a commercial niche of detective story, and then it upset a lot of people.
And now another thing that's just kind of interesting in it, just in terms of the French-English difference, I think there's a very different attitude towards horror stories historically between the two, and maybe you can tell me a bit more about it, but it strikes me that the French, how I understand it, is the French have a more literary, they kind of include horror in literature a bit more fully than we have traditionally in North America, and to a certain degree pays a bit more respect to horror, but on the other hand has a much more bombastic and kind of gruesome tradition of horror. If you go back to the Grand Guignol and so on, you have on one hand like these very explosive kind of surrealist or like surreal-esque over the top style in the French tradition to some degree. But then you also have like a greater respect at least in some, critically speaking, for genres like horror. The French were quicker to take up Hitchcock and Poe as serious authors, than the English-speaking world was, and so on. So I'm just kind of curious also to know to what degree do you see yourself as connected to that French tradition, or and do you see any connections between what you're doing here and the Oulipo? Because I see that kind of mathematical setup, and then, as you say, just sort of here's the playing out of this kind of rigorous playing out of the scenario. It's not as rule based, but it has that kind of, here is the frame, here is the way it's going to unfold. Now let's just watch it unfold in a certain, as you say, mathematical fashion. So I'm just kind of curious to know what your other roots are in terms of your relationship to maybe French literature.
Well, I'm not really sure that the French are more connecting than the, Americans. Are more connecting to horror. There is a horror history in literature, maybe not horror, but fantastic. I think to Théophile Gautier or people like that, but not that much, I guess. So horror is still really popular and depreciated genre. In France, I think it's the same in the US. Huh? We are in niche, so no, I don't think there is really a difference in this. History of French horror is more cerebral, maybe. It's more linked to the surrealism, but the surrealism is not popular. It was a bourgeois genre, it's more that maybe aristocratic genre. That's what I mean. Because surrealism is absolutely not popular. Those people were rich, and they were in the Paris, in the Saint-Germain-des-Prés, and it was not a popular. Horror is popular in France, but the writers are not considered as the high-level writers in the US. It's not the case too. So to talk about the Oulipo, yes, I love the Oulipo as a reader, but I'm not gifted enough, I think, to write like the people of the Oulipo, because this way of writing is too difficult for me. I'm not able to do this. There is a frame in my novels, in all of them. Sometimes really straight and really complex frame, but Oulipo is more than that, and I respect it a lot because it's really difficult to make just a poem with the problematic of the Oulipo. So I know a lot of them. They are still active in France and in Belgium. I don't know if you know one of them, but there are a lot of poets. There are a lot of poets here. The Oulipo still exists. There is the association with the president and poets, and they are thinking about a lot of things. There are a lot of they do a lot of poetry, vocal poetry, and it's really, really interesting, but really, really difficult to translate, I think, because Oulipo is so difficult to I know, for a writer of the Oulipo, it's too difficult to deal with his own language. I think translation would be mainly impossible. Well, to come back to my literary roots, I think I was a reader of Stephen King when I was a child, and I think it was really an influence and a reference for me for a lot of time. But I haven't read him for, I don't know, decades maybe. But I think it grew up inside me. And I have his books in my mind, very far, but they are here, and that's some kind of earth where all my novels grow. I think it's something like that, and for the horror and for the fantastic, but for the rest, I read a lot of things, a lot of novels, a lot of genre, mainly like a regular novel in the French and from all over the world. I'm a bookseller, so I read a lot of things. And I think when I write something, I'm trying to do what no one has done before. That's my goal. That's my aim.
So what attracted you, where did you first come up with the idea for this book? What I'm wondering is, did you first have the idea of, a kind of horror story with these young children, or did you first have the idea of this kind of neutral narrator describing a horrible thing. And then you settled, and then got the children after that point. I'm kind of wondering what the origins of this idea were initially for you.
I will try to be clear because I don't speak English well, so it's a long story actually. So first of all, I was working on the forest. I wanted to write something about the forest, and I'm a very paranoiac person. When I go to the forest with my kids, I'm afraid. I'm always thinking, and if I die right now, if I fall on the ground and they are here, and what will they do in the middle of the forest? That was, I think, I was the point. That was my fear with my own children. My first daughter had, was 4 or 5, and we were walking on the forest, and I thought, what if? And then I thought about the human civilization, and he's the human race today adapted to the forest. I think we are not adapted to the forest anymore. So our children would die if they were alone on the forest. They would die. So that was the beginning. It was a long time ago. I had this idea, and then some of my friends in Burgundy here, they create a publishing house, and the name was Trash, and they wanted to do the most horrible thing in the French literature. So they beginning to write a horrible novel with necrophilia and things like that. That was absolutely horrible, and I thought maybe I could write something for them. And then I think all was connected, and I thought maybe I could write something. What is the most horrible thing I could write? And I thought kids dying, because it's very rare, and in the literature, even in the cinema, it's rare. So I thought I could do this in an extreme way. And where do the children die? In the forest. So that was the beginning of the novel, and it was really quick. I wrote it very fast because I had written another novel that took me 4 years, and it was a long work and hard work, and I wanted to do something fast and straight, and I thought that's the plan. I have 2 months, 3 months, or maybe 4 months. That's very fast for me, and I will write this day and night to accomplish this little book for my friends. But then writing the book, it became something else, because it was not the style of the Trash publishing house, because Trash was more joking with the style of horror, and writing The Laws of the Sky, I thought, no, that's not for them, because it's not funny. This project is not funny.
And when did you get the strange narrative voice? Was that something that just kind of when you were writing it, or is like how did you end up with that unusual voice?
It was from the beginning. I think really from the very beginning, I found this way of telling this story, and it was natural. It was really natural, because kids in the woods has to be narrated by this kind of narrator, by this kind of natural, and I don't know, like in a fairy tale. In in the book you read, in the cover, it is written "Once Upon a Time." It was not in the French edition, but I think it's a really good idea, because Once Upon a Time, it's the project of this. It's in a way really realistic, really precise, but in the other way, it's a fairy tale. It's a grown-up fairy tale. So the narrator come up really naturally. I had when I rewrite the book with my editor, we thought that he was too cynical, actually, or in some way, reader could thought it was too cynical. So we attenuate some passage, some sentences to have a narrator more neutral and more frightening in a way.
I think it's so interesting, because my big complaint about horror as a genre is that the thing I always say is, if it's a horror story and the things that are happening are so horrible, it should be hard. It should either be hard to tell about these things, and the narrative voice should reflect how difficult this is, and should be stuttering and stumbling and just having a hard time explaining to us what has happened, or it should, this is more sort of what your book is doing, or it should be, if it's going to have this cold, neutral relaying of information, then we should be disturbed by that, as opposed to the normal way that these novels will work is it's a horrible thing, but it's just being relayed in a transparent prose by a kind of transparent narrator who's not really present. And I think that the more, what I like about the book a lot is, there's a lot of things I like about this book, but one thing that just struck me the most was it kind of finally realized this kind of narrator that I've always wanted in a horror story, which is the narrator who is there and telling us the story, as opposed to just kind of absent and the story's coming to us. So that voice telling us is sort of, again, becoming a disturbing presence, and is almost a stain on the story in a manner of speaking. And so we don't get to feel, again, we get very kind of made aware of our position, because we have to constantly just re-engage with this voice that's telling us these things. And to what degree might we be like this voice, I think, is where some of the sort of disturbing aspects really come into play. So to me, it's a very fascinating book, because it kind of realizes one of these two positions that I'm really interested in when stories do this work. You probably want to know this author, but there's a great Canadian author named Tony Burgess who does very unusual experimental horror stories. But he goes in the other direction. The way he describes it is he tries to tell stories with a deteriorating consciousness. So it's like, as the story is being told, it's starting to break apart and become unstable because of how traumatic the events are. And I think your book is an interesting kind of complement to his work insofar as it's doing the opposite thing. But they both have this kind of unconventional subversion of what you normally would see in the more conventional kind of genre approach to the material.
Yes, the first thing you said was about science, and I'm agree with that, because I love science. I'm reading scientific articles, and I'm really aware of things of the science in general. So this voice, this narrator, is really precise, because he knows things. He knows how a kid died, why he dies, not because he had I don't know whatever a rock on the head, but because the rock on his head crushed his skull and then provoke an hemorrhage, and then
there's a moment near the
stops.
end where he starts to talk in that precise way of like, this boar is eating you, or this boar is eating this person, and he starts describing like, now I need to describe this very precisely to you because you have to understand, how this would be, and it becomes that very clinical, precise description, and it's very interesting, like how the narrator kind of couches everything in that. You have to know this exactly. But the reason is never clear, other than perhaps, again, almost so that you don't. The way I read it was, it's almost, this precision is almost so that you don't accidentally start thinking this means something, and the story has a lesson in a strange sort of way. Again, it seems like a subversion often of the normal way horror stories like to defend themselves when they're attacked by saying, "Oh, it's a warning. This is, a warning. This is what we hope, and so on." And I think that your book it does a lot of work to avoid defending itself, if that makes sense. From
of course,
say charges of bad taste.
For me, it's the worst in the horror movies. Actually, when there is a moral, when the killer or maybe the ghost, when the ghost come back from the dead to avenge or because you have done something wrong and you are punished for this, and I hate this. I hate this kind of moral. I think more like a scientist, and I think if you die, that's because of natural causes or accidental causes, but it's not the fate, and you don't deserve it. And those kids, of course, don't deserve to die, but they die anyway because it's the life, because it's like the title, it's the laws. that is the law. You have to die, even kids sometimes. That's sad, but it's the science. You have this position is the position of the narrator, and that's why this narrator is disturbing. When you talk about the end and this shocking final scene. This scene, if you read with attention this scene, the narrator changed the way, changed the point of view. He says, "You are eaten. That's not the kid. It's you." And it's something very strong in the book, and I really tried hard to write this scene with the more precise thing, because that's what I think. I think when we read something, and you are right about it, when we read something, we think it could mean something. You could project your mind where to something else, to a political metaphor, or and that was the problem in this book, because there is the I forgot the title, the Golden Books. I'm so stupid. Lord of the Flies. When you write something like that, there is the Lord of the Flies with the political metaphor and the humanist metaphor, and I wanted to do the exact opposite of this. That was for me. It was written in my little book notes. Do not do any metaphor, any allegory. Go away from this.
Well, you did a really brilliant job, and it's really outstanding and strange, and fascinating little book that I really encourage people to check out. So thanks very much for talking to me, Gregoire, and I hope that more of your work gets translated into English, because it's really interesting, wonderful job that they did with this book.
Thanks to you, and I hope I will improve my English since then.
Right. Well, thanks again, and again, the book is The Laws of the Skies by Gregoire Courtois, and is published in English by Coach House Books. And if you go to writingtherwrongway.com, then you can find links to all that stuff. So thanks again, Gregoire, and for talking to me, and for writing such a disturbing and strange and beautiful book.